Afternoon. Welcome everyone to the 23rd annual Larson Allmaras lecture, um, Emerging Issues in Soil and Water lecture. My name is Fabian Fernandez. I'm a professor here at the Department of Soil, Water, and Climate at the University of Minnesota, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our lecture series today. Before we get started, we have a number of special guests with us today, and I would like to take a little moment to introduce them. Some of them are here in person, some are joining us online. We established this lecture in the name of Dr. Larson and Dr. Allmaras, and we have here several family members from the Allmaras family. In person, we have, and maybe as I name you, if you can just maybe wave or stand up so that people know who you are, that would be great. We have John Allmaras from Oklahoma. She's Ray's daughter. Mary Allmaras from Colorado, also one of Ray's daughters. Scott and Madeline Hauser from Colorado, and this is Ray's grandson. And Anthony Allmaras from the University of Nebraska. He's somewhere. And also Jessica Olson from University of Nebraska. Jessica is Anthony's girlfriend. And both of them, there he is. Both of them, so originally we were going to have this lecture a little bit earlier, like a couple of weeks earlier, I think. And they weren't going to make it because they were doing their prelims. They passed, both of them passed their prelims. Yeah, congratulations. And I mean, they're in engineering. We won't say much about that, but because our speaker is an engineer and there are members of the committee that are engineers, but wonderful accomplishment. Both of them are graduating with their master's degrees now in May, so this is awesome. We also have Lorene McMahon. McMahon. Sister. Yes, Ray's sister. Mike and Janice Strowley from Minnesota. He's Ray's nephew. George and Meg McMahon from Minnesota, Ray's nephew. I said okay? Close, sorry. And so, did I forget anybody in person here that is here in person? Okay, anybody from, okay, wonderful. So, and then we have many members that are present online. They couldn't make it all the way to Minnesota, but we really appreciate both the ones that are able to come in person as well as those that are online. Online, we have Camille Lex from Minnesota. This is Ray's sister. Three of Ray's children. Kathleen Allmaras from Washington. Steve Allmaras from Washington. Colleen Adamu from California. We also have two of Ray's sons-in-law, Rahim Adamu from California, Mark Hauser from Oklahoma, and three of Ray's grandsons, Paul Hauser from Oklahoma, Rasik Adamu from Arizona, and Rashid Adamu from Virginia. So this is, I always tell people, this is such a wonderful thing that we have with this lecture, that we have so much support from the family, and we just love that. We really appreciate that. Right now, I'm on a sabbatical. I shouldn't be here, but I told Brent I am going to be there because I want to be there. I really enjoy the opportunity to see all of you here and to feel your support. So let's give them a hand. We also want to express appreciation to the Allmaras family for their support on this lecture series and in setting up the Raymond Allmaras Endowed Professorship and the Ray Allmaras Graduate Student Fellowship. Let's give them a thanks for that as well. So this lecture started back in 2003. Satish Gupta started this lecture. Satish is here with us. And so, yeah, let's give him a hand. And we have had many wonderful presentations throughout the years. There is a list there of all the topics and the speakers. And I'm really excited to add one more person to that list this year with Matt Helmers. I will introduce him later. This lecture is an opportunity that we have as a community to come together to talk about issues related to soil, and water, and look at emerging issues and create a forum really to explore some of these really challenging things that we have with dealing with soil and water. And so we are grateful that you are here today. Now, this is a collective effort. I'm the chair of this committee, but we have a number of members of the committee. We have Brent from the USDA ARS. He's also in relation to the soil, water, climate as well. He's associated. Diana Kerwin, she couldn't be here today, from Forest Resources. Yava Kiaska from the Department of Agriculture, Minnesota Department of Agriculture. Joel Larson from Water Resources Center. We have Lindsay Pease from Soil, Water, and Climate. I don't think Lindsay is here. She may be online. Carol Rosen, she probably still frozen in the north. Lindsay. Carol Rosen from our department. Gary Sands from BBE, another engineer. Jeff Strzok from the Southwest Research and Outreach Center, and also in our department. Melissa Wilson from our department. She's also on a panel right now, so she couldn't attend. And we also have two very important members of the committee that help us with all the logistics, and I would like you to give a special thanks to them. They're Ariana Rodig and Nora Poole. They are sitting in the back. So thank you. So what I will do now is turn the time over to Mike Schmidt to talk about the college, give us an update on the college. And then after Mike, we'll have Brent Williams from our department to give an update on the department.
Thank you, Fabian. It's great to be here. Good afternoon. I'm Mike Schmidt, Associate Dean in the College of Food, Agricultural, and Natural Resource Sciences. Just as proud, though, I am also a member of the Department of Soil, Water, and Climate. I was a faculty member here many years ago, and that's why I'm really pleased here today to introduce, or to say a welcome from CFANS. I'm not going to be introducing Matt, but I've known Matt for many years, and I'm looking forward to his presentation. I personally knew both Bill and Ray when I was a junior faculty member. And what a pleasure it is to be here at their lecture series. I viewed them both as role model faculty members and scientists in the department, and truly wanted to emulate them, in my career. I specifically remember Ray would come down to second floor and he'd just casually walk down the hallway, and if your door was open, he'd put his head in and he'd say hi and how you doing? And you just wanted to have a conversation, and we did. And that was a really good memory of Ray. This was back in the early 1990s and that, but it meant a lot to me to know Ray and Bill as well. Bill was a department head who thankfully hired me as a faculty member here. Thus, on behalf of the college, I want to express huge thanks to the families of both Ray and Bill for making this lecture series possible. A department's reputation and value is predicated on faculty, staff, and students coming together for scholarship and engagement at functions like this. Now, Brent asked me to give a very, there's that slide. Just a real brief update on what's going on at the college level, and it will be brief. There's a lot going on, but we'll be brief. We're here for the seminar, not to listen to me. As you know, Dean Brian Boer is returning to faculty, and there's an active search process going on right now for the new dean. A search firm was contracted to lead this process, and they have been hosting numerous listening sessions. I hope, you were able to attend one or more of those. There has not yet been a posting of that position. So, we're at that stage of the game. The provost has a goal of July 1st for the new dean. Regardless, I hope everyone, will engage whenever possible, as everyone's voice needs to be heard in this process. The dean is really important. The dean leads to the departments. The departments are made up of you. It's important that your voice is heard. I also want to give just a brief update on this strategic planning process that's going on. The entire university under President Cunningham, has a goal right now to create a strategic plan for the university. And there's lots of moving pieces with this overall strategic plan. And one of those pieces is that every college has been asked to develop a strategic plan as well. It might be considered a bit awkward being as how we're in the middle of a leadership transition, but as good Minnesotans, we're following instructions and we are working on a strategic plan. And in a way, I think it's a really good opportunity, not knowing, who the next dean will be, to have some really, I think, good input into what our college needs to be doing for the future, because we've really got to be looking towards the future, and find our, to improve our niche and our value for Minnesotans and, a global community. And finally, I'll just mention the St. Paul project, really a fluid situation there. This project is going to start being implemented in the next few months. The main library is shutting down. Some of that's going to be moving up to the Hodson Hall Library area. And they're going to be making room down the hill for a new student center in that space, which some of the library space will be, on the top floors of the student center. And then that leads to transition for the student center. And this is a 2-3 year project. We just need to be patient and know that there has been years of planning in this and that it will be good. Change is hard, but the future can be good here. And in separate planning talks, housing issues on campus seem to be getting some traction. Bailey Hall may be transitioning, et cetera. But again, just, things need to change and for the better. So enough of this. You're not here to listen to me. I'm here to listen to Matt Helmers' presentation. So thanks for being here and participating on behalf of the college, whether in person or online. It's great to have everybody here.
All right, thanks so much, Mike. Really appreciate the college update. So now I get to present our departmental update. Again, I know we're all here to hear Matt, but this is an exciting opportunity to kind of share what's been happening over the last 12 months in our department. Certainly has been a lot. I would often end with this, but I'm going to start with this. If you're not receiving a departmental newsletter called The Profile, please contact Nora Poole, who's in the back of the room here. Email address there. Show of hands, who does get the newsletter? Okay, show of hands, who doesn't? Oh, I'm definitely calling one person out. Okay, he's taking a picture. He's good. Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks to the Allmaras family for being here. And always your generosity, much appreciated. Fabian, you're on sabbatical, so it's great to get to see you for a day. And tomorrow you're expected to disappear for more months here. And thanks also to our staff in Soil, Water, and Climate, Ariana, Hannah, Nora, and Carrie over here for putting all this together. So this last year, we had a pretty big group of graduate students start with us over the spring and fall. We had 16 new students, and that brought our total, we're closer to around 50 graduate students in the program, which is one of the larger grad programs in the college. So we're actually doing quite well, and in spite of the sort of federal and state funding landscape, folks are working hard and bringing new opportunities in for our next generation of scientists still. I wanted to acknowledge a lot of our graduate students who have received scholarships from our various donors for the departmental fellowships and various travel awards and scholarships that are offered. So Sony and Evelyn for Allmaras and How graduate fellowships this last year. Lauren and Jake for the Earl Keenest Family Endowment support. Saliha for the William Zanner Fellowship. Victor, GP, Amir, and Sukhdeep for the H.H. Chang Family Graduate Support. H.H. Chang was also a past department head. Mamet for the Horgil Hur Fund for Graduate Student Support. Trey for the Donald Baker Scholarship, and Rosita for the Satish and Cynthia Gupta Fund. Outside of departmental recognition for these students, it's been a really amazing year. This is not a complete list. This is an example of the various external awards and scholarships that these students have been receiving. So Renzo, are you in the room? I think, yeah, Renzo's not with us today. Renzo might win for the most number of awards. But other, wonderful awards, for example, Jennifer with the Community Engaged Scholar Award from the Office of Public Engagement, GP, a really competitive Distinguished Dissertation Fellowship Award, Saya for also a competitive Hugh Harrison Fellowship, Evelyn for FFAR Fellowship, very competitive. A number of recognition for Rosita, Victor, Jake, Trey, for various student competitions at national conferences like the Canvas and American Meteorological Society conferences. And then more recently, Lauren and Lily for winning interdisciplinary dissertation fellowships for the coming year. I also want to recognize Fabian and Randy Kolka. One of our adjunct faculty members were both named this last year to the Soil Science Society America Fellows, which is really a career achievement that's being recognized as your society, that from your professional society, that you are have achieved this sort of long-lasting impact in the field. And then also Tim Griffiths for the American Meteorological Society Fellowship Fellow. All right, a couple updates from our soil judging team. So these are undergraduate students that compete regionally and nationally for soil judging, and our University of Minnesota team has been really active. Here's an example of our regional placement and national placement over the previous years, over the last decade or so. And the one thing I'll say, to go to nationals, you need to qualify for that. And our team has qualified for 7 years in a row for nationals. That's the most national qualifying team of anyone in any team in our region. So that's quite an honor in itself. And actually there's 2 different national competitions. So I'll share that in a moment. Here's some more photos from the team. You'll notice these are the soil profiles that they go through, and they judge the characteristics of different soils in different regions, often regions that they've never been to before. So it's an interesting challenge. One thing I'll have you note is the different colors that exist in these profiles. That'll come back in a few minutes here related to the colors. So just keep that in mind. Photos of the students in competition. I would say we are now, this past year, we had 24 participating students this last academic year. All 24 of those students had the opportunity to travel to either a regional or a national competition this year. So those students get to travel. For example, this year it was Nebraska, North Carolina, and Illinois. Actually, Illinois is coming up shortly. And I would definitely say these are really high impact experiences that are really important to our soil science students. And usually having this experience leads those students into a career that's going to continue to be related to soil and water. Other updates from our department, we finally have a complete staffing structure in the department. We've struggled for a couple of years. And last year we added Ariana, Nora, and Amber to our team. And Hannah, I look back at last year's slides, there was a question mark at who our department administrator was going to be, and we've welcomed Hannah Walmo this last year, and it's been a really wonderful addition to the team. And Carrie and Sue are our pros that keep us going strong. So this has been a wonderful team to work with this last year, and actually it's enabled us to do a lot more in the department. For example, holding more events and gatherings and discussions. Here's an example from a few weeks ago. We had an emeritus lunch, and I think we ended up with maybe about 10 emeritus came back and joined us, and we had some discussions. It was a really great opportunity, and we've been doing some social things. For example, we went. If people want to claim that they're a Minnesotan, I think you have to try your hand at curling. So we went as a department, faculty, staff, and students curling. Lots of other meetings, lots of other discussions. As everybody's aware, Minnesota this semester has had a really trying time. We had to adapt a lot of our teaching practices and various practices around campus for security reasons. We have a lot of international students. We have hard to talk about this in a politically correct way. It was a challenging semester in unnecessary ways. I would just say that. But I was really amazed at the way that faculty, staff, and students came together, shared resources, shared opportunities, shared ideas, and just had open discussions about how to be together as a community. And it was really something amazing to be a part of. And I can't really get into the details of it here, but I'll just say I was really proud of this department and the way that they worked through things together, some real hard challenges. This happened about a year ago, but it takes a year to hear back on the news. But we have a year ago promotions to associate professor for Anna, Lindsay, and Heidi, and promotions to full professor for Satoshi, Dan, and Yushin. I think this was one of the largest groups of promotions to go through the college at one time from one department, is what I've heard, and they were all successful. So what a great group, and just shows the wonderful work that everybody's doing. We have 2 promotions in the pipeline right now that we're about to hear back on too. Sort of a last note on updates for our faculty is we're currently hiring 2 new positions at the tenure track level. One in related to our lecture here today, soil physics, ecohydrology, hydropodology, and another position in climate science. So we've had a lot of retirements, and we're bringing in 2 new scientists in these areas. And I would say that we had some really great applications across both of these positions. So it's been exciting. We're really excited to bring in new folks. And then I want to recognize a few losses from our community this past year. Dr. Swatab Patel passed away this last fall. He was a researcher 6 with us working on nitrogen fertilizer best management practices for the state. With Matt here, Swatab got his master's and PhD at Iowa State, and did a lot of work in cover cropping and nitrogen and nutrient management practices, nitrogen reduction approaches. And it's really interesting to see where Swatab went after graduating. He spent time doing research in Wisconsin, in Kansas, in Nebraska, and then here in Minnesota. And I would say, related to today's lecture, this Midwest nitrogen reduction strategy discussion we're about to hear, I would say Swatab truly was a Midwest nutrient management specialist, and I know would definitely be joining for this lecture here today in spirit. 2 other community members that we lost this past year. The first on the left is Melvin Giles. Melvin was our the very first community research fellow that we had. Melvin was the co-founder of the Urban Farm and Garden Alliance and a pillar of St. Paul's Rondo and Frogtown neighborhoods. Nick had a quote that he shared. Melvin stood in the middle of community and university relationships with ease and preached the need to slow down and participate in each other's lives to create shared experiences and shared realities. That change happens at the speed of trust. And that's so true. If anyone's tried to work across research and communities, it really is all about trust. And Melvin was a great example of that. And then also, we lost this past year a past graduate student of ours, Al Lohese, who became a faculty member in DRC and was a student of Nick's as well. Said Nick said during his time in the LAS program, Al's grace, kindness, and endless positive attitude influenced students and faculty across our department, college, and university. And others echoed that. I heard about Al's time here, that he would poke his head into people's offices, like we heard about Ray as well, and just have really great conversations. So this seems like a bit of an odd transition after those last few notes, but there's this common saying in soil science that we're all just only temporarily not soil. We come from the soil, we return to the soil. So with that in mind, I'm actually going to invite Beth Fisher up here for a moment to share with us. Beth was a graduate student of our LAS program and is now a faculty member at Minnesota State University Mankato. And recently, also on sabbatical, so thanks for joining us on your sabbatical, but has taken a venture into art. So I'll share.
So part of my sabbatical was making soil monoliths, and I had extra money, and I was collecting soil monoliths. So the first thing I want to tell you is that I was invited to collect soils on the field studies class last spring, and it was an absolute honor to see my former office mate in his element doing this. And he had brought together, see, I'm like kind of this. He had brought together people from 2 tribal colleges along with our U of M students. And I was just a fly on the wall getting to experience this amazing connection between these students. And he was really disappointed because they had federal funding to get the tribal students credit here at the university to have soils on their transcript. And that was canceled. And they still made it. Nick was basically creating a certificate and a ceremony for them to still have record of their soils training for their job prospects. And the first time I heard him say this little quote that I painted with soil pigments, he was standing on a tailgate in an area where there had been forest fire impact. So it was this very glamorous setting that was so significant. But we had brought together all of these people who had been connecting at that point for about a week, learning about soil. And I think Nick was teary-eyed, and most of us were teary-eyed as he said, I don't know, I guess he says this a bit, but it was the first time I heard it. Soils are magic, soils are connectors. And when we study soils, we study ourselves. So when I started playing with soil pigments and basically learning how to do watercolor, I came from graphic design for a minute in my life. And so going to lettering and fonts was like a happy place for me. So I was like, that's something I want to paint. And so I want to give that painting to Nick. I have it here for you. So that's for you here in the department. For the rest of us, we have like stickers and cards of it, but Nick gets the real stuff. And then
Sure.
Yeah.
Like here.
So most of those paints were actually made by another soil scientist, and you can buy her paints at the Art of Soil. The word connectors is my first soil pigment, so that was kind of fun that was the word, ended up being my first paint that I made. So I've been making soil paints, and part of the exhibit that I did was making a whole series of paintings with the soil-based pigments and watercolor paints. And one of the series that I did, I would be very honored if your department would accept it as part of an art collection. It is a series of 5 paintings that I made The blue in there is pure mineral because I wanted to be very intentional about making sure it didn't look like it was taken from the blue earth the formation that has cultural significance in southern Minnesota. So it's pure mineral. But otherwise, the pigments are from my region. The brown is from my yard, which this is one crowd where I can say this. My house is on the Plainfield soil, which is actually the soil series that I grew up on in Wisconsin. So kind of crazy that that's where my house is in St. Peter, Minnesota. So anyway, I would be honored if you would accept that as a gift for your department. This series is about how federal legislation has shaped our landscape in southern Minnesota. So, yeah.
We will be honored. We'll be honored to accept that. Thank you so much. Yeah, well, that will be on display shortly. All right, well, back to Bobby.
Right. Thank you, Brent. Let's see. All right. Well, now it's my great honor and privilege to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Matthew Helmers. He is the Dean's Professor in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences and professor in the Department of Agricultural and Biosystems Engineering at Iowa State University. He also is the director of the Iowa Nutrient Research Center. He has been on the faculty of the Iowa State University since 2003. He earned his doctorate from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, a master's degree from Virginia Tech, and a bachelor's degree from Iowa State University. Dr. Helmer's research area includes studies on the impact of nutrient management, cropping practices, drainage design and management, and strategic placement of buffer systems on nutrient exports from agricultural landscapes. He has a regional extension program working to increase adoption of practices that have the potential to reduce downstream nutrient exports. He serves as the nitrogen science team lead on the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy Assessment. And Matt has been a great colleague of mine. I've had the privilege to work with him in several different projects. We are done with the project, but we like our group so much that we continue to meet monthly if we can. And it's just been a privilege to work with Matt. And that's why I joke about engineers all the time. But and I have some of my own children that are engineers now, so nobody has followed my steps yet. So that may be telling me something. But we are just privileged to have Matt here with us today. The title of his presentation is the title of his presentation. There we go. All right, the title of his presentation is Upper Midwest Nutrient Reduction Strategies, Progress, the Scale of Change Needed, and Future Directions. Matt?
Well, thank you, Fabian, for inviting me, for the introduction. Beth, the artwork is just beautiful. I don't know how I come after that. That's better than anything I will talk about. I am truly humbled to be here today and thankful. As I start this, very often in my career now, I think of that song, One of These Things Is Not Like the Other. And that's the way I feel when I look at those that have delivered this lecture in the past. I don't think that I'm worthy of that, and just thankful, but probably most thankful for some of the great colleagues, mentors, and friends that I've had over the years, and many from the University of Minnesota or from Minnesota in general. I look out here and to see Giles Randall that I met in 2003. We both looked a little different. You looked about the same. I had hair back then. Gary Sands, who really has been just, Mike mentioned it about somebody you looked up to. That's the way I've always looked up to Gary throughout the years. Gary Feiereisen was in here as well, that somebody else, and Yeba, and Reed and Laura Christensen that we had the good fortune to spending time with at Iowa State University. In fact, some of the things I'll talk about today, Reed was really the brains behind for sure. And as mentioned, Fabian and I got to work on the Nutrinet project, and yeah, we continued to meet for multiple years after the project. It was like our monthly therapy session just to talk about shared science. And, when you talked about just walking in, and this was our opportunity with colleagues from Illinois and Minnesota and Purdue and from Canada and ARS to talk about science and talk about things that were going on. It was so important. And then I think there's Lindsay Pease, who, again, online, known Lindsay for a lot of years and a great colleague. And then, Brent, you mentioned Randy Kolka. Randy is another individual that outside of my drainage life, that I've had the good fortune to work with. Again, somebody that I view as a major mentor in my career. And so it is really just an honor to be here. And as I think about Dr. Allmaras, and look at his career, I might be an engineer, but we followed some similar pathways. I got my undergraduate, maybe not in the same order, but, not in the same order. And we had a good talk about the housing, the married student housing at Iowa State University and Pamel Court. It's no longer there, but were the Quonset huts for married student housing post World War II. But I spent time at Iowa State University for my undergrad, Virginia Tech, and then University of Nebraska. And for those, I'm outside of Iowa now, so everybody in Iowa knows I have this special place in my heart for the University of Nebraska. Well, and for Nebraska in general. I think Nebraska is the most beautiful state in the union that I've been to. Most people see the worst part of Nebraska because you drive on I-80, but if you go to the Sandhills, and the Sandhills grassland of Nebraska is maybe my most special place in all of it. Okay, that I've been to. I'm also, some things come full circle. I think that 23 years ago, I could look back and it's almost the same day, 23 years ago, that I interviewed for a position with the ARS unit here. I was fortunate enough, I guess, for me, that I ended up getting a position in my home state at Iowa State University. Again, grew up in Iowa, Northwest Iowa, so it's been just a privilege to be back there and to work on something that I think is important. This gets to it. Why do we care about water? I don't think anybody in here would say we don't care about water, but we're going to talk a little bit about why we care, what maybe some of the things we can do to improve our water, and maybe stimulate some dialogue on how we get there. I certainly don't have the answers. I joke that I think Reed will understand this. We started this journey on the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy in October of 2010. We met, was it every 2 weeks? Every 2 weeks for about 2 years on this. And I remember a couple colleagues that many of you probably know, Dr. John Sawyer and Dr. Antonio Mallarina, said, folks, this could consume your life from now on. And I remember laughing like, oh, that's not going to happen. We don't have to worry about that. I don't think there's been a day since October of 2010 that I haven't thought about the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy in one way, shape, or form. And I hope when I'm at the end of my career, which is getting a little closer, that I feel like we've done something to make some progress on this. I'm reminded, Giles, Jim Baker, when he retired, his comment, he said, I've worked 30 years on this, and we haven't solved the problem. He said, I hope we haven't made it worse. But I really want to acknowledge, a lot of the work that we've done in Iowa. Giles was a real leader internationally on drainage water quality work. And we've done a lot of work in Iowa that I hope he would say builds off of some of that. Okay, but as I talk to, so I do a lot of extension work and I talk to farmers. And I guess I'd like to say, why do we care? We care about water because it's places we recreate. I think we're in Minnesota, so you don't see any lakes like that in Minnesota, but we do in Iowa, and that's not something we want. And certainly what is creating the news in Iowa to a great extent right now is this lower right, the drinking water supplies. And we'll talk about that on the challenges that we face. So in 2008, the Hypoxia Task Force had an action plan, and they called for states to develop comprehensive nitrogen and phosphorus reduction strategies. This comes at a time when there's, substantial demand for our ag products, even though, prices can be lower or higher at times. So there is an increasing concern. Just a bit of background, everybody in here probably knows, but this Gulf hypoxic zone, this dead zone that forms annually in the Gulf, and they attribute the growth and size of that to increased nitrogen and phosphorus loading down the river. And so an EPA Science Advisory Board, their recommendation is that to reduce the size of that zone to 2,000 square miles, we need to reduce total riverine nitrogen and phosphorus loads by 45%. Okay, I'm going to try this. Sometimes it got to be a little interactive. Who thinks that's easy to do? Okay, nobody. Okay, so nobody here is the eternal optimist. Who thinks that's impossible? Okay, I got one impossible. Okay, who thinks it's possible but a big task? Okay, that's where I am. I think it is possible, but it's a huge undertaking. And I think if there's one thing that I've realized over the last decade plus is I don't think there's a recognition, at least by some, maybe more in the general public, of the scale of change that we need. And I'm going to talk about that. I think that, there are a couple take-home points that I would give. One is, give it now, and then I'll go through it. We have the tools. We have many of the tools that we need for nutrient reduction. And I think specifically on nitrogen reduction. But the scale of change is huge, and we need to accelerate that rate of adoption. Okay, so in Iowa, I'm going to talk, a lot of this will be focused on Iowa, but, it's somewhat similar. Matt gave a great seminar on the Minnesota, the nutrient loss reduction. Ours is the nutrient reduction.
Ours is nutrient reduction.
Okay, Illinois is the nutrient loss reduction strategy. Okay, but we call for a 41% reduction from non-point, primarily agricultural sources, and a 29 on phosphorus. So we don't have to get all 45 of that from agricultural or non-point sources, but the bulk of it comes from that. Okay. In Iowa, there's been a lot of work with our wastewater treatment plants on reducing nitrogen and phosphorus. They need to do feasibility studies for implementing greater reduction as they do the permitting process. Okay, so a few pieces, I guess, to say, where are we trending? And so if you look at the USGS data for the annual nitrogen loading at the mouth of the Mississippi, that red line there is the 45%, the bright red line, I guess, is a 45% reduction goal. 20% is the interim goal of 20% reduction by 2025. And if we look at that, we are pretty much meeting that 20% reduction by 2025, okay, in the flow normalized load to the Gulf, which is a good thing. I guess what I would say is, and I'll show you at least from Iowa, I'm not sure that reduction is coming from the northern part of the Corn Belt. Okay, so now if you want to look at some other locations, so these are a couple pieces of information people might be interested in. So resource, the Great Lakes to Gulf has a great website where you can look at what the trends are in nitrogen and phosphorus concentration and load. They've reviewed, Greg McIsaac and others have gone in and reviewed data that's available for flow and nutrient concentration. And so this is kind of a good news situation. We have many, and I forgot that, the legend on there, those upside down blue triangles are where it's likely decreased. the concentration is likely decreasing. The red triangles are where it's likely increasing in concentration. Okay, so if we look at this, I look at this, well, Iowa's not so bad. We got a lot of decreasing concentrations from 2000 to 2020. Minnesota, a few, Illinois, a lot of monitoring locations, so they are seeing reductions. Maybe Northeast Iowa and Southwest Wisconsin, some increases. Now, at the same time, maybe some of those concentrations went down. If you look at load, it's not quite as positive. Then as we look at across, parts of Minnesota and Iowa, we are seeing increasing loads in those locations. So this is kind of one of the factors we'll talk about, but climate and precipitation can really drive what we're seeing in results at the outflow. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening here. So many of you may have driven through Des Moines or know where Des Moines is, right? So we're at the I'll wait. First, I'm going to get to what Iowa's showing in general, okay? And then we'll get to the Des Moines. Okay, so here's our Iowa. So the load in tons of nitrate, nitrogen per inch of flow. And we have data going back to 2000 measured data where we're measuring streams and capture about 80% of the area in the state. And so if you look at that, are we improving, staying about the same, or getting worse? About the same, right? So over 20 years, we haven't gotten better, we haven't gotten worse. Okay, now that can be a bit discouraging. I guess it can be, at least we haven't gotten worse. Okay, now the Raccoon River is one of the major drinking water supplies for the city of Des Moines. And the Raccoon River is, right now they've been running the nitrate removal facility for Des Moines most of this spring. Okay, and you can see here Des Moines Water Works has a fabulous data set. I see, okay, the black dots are the nitrate concentration, almost daily nitrate concentration that Des Moines Water Works collects near where their infiltration gallery is. The green line is the discharge at that point in the stream. And so we can see they had times above 10 milligrams per liter, even back into the 70s. What we see though is that, certainly in the 2000s, a lot of years, and then we see these big increases, like here, this is 2013. Does folks remember? Nancy may remember what was the Des Moines low? What do we have for precipitation? Lots of corn, but what do we have in 2012? Drought. So what we see is that those years post drought, we see these big increases in nitrate concentration. Okay, and we similarly 2020. 2021, 2022, and 2023 were pretty dry. I'll show you in a minute at one of our drainage water quality sites, cumulative across those 4 years, we had about 4 inches of drainage, cumulative on 4 years. Normally we get 8 to 9 inches of drainage annually at that site. Okay, so I could have, and we said it going into 2024, if it's wet, we're going to see high nitrate concentrations. And that's what we did see right there. But we've seen that continue now. Okay, so here is moving a little further up in the Raccoon River, but it's at Sac City. This is the daily the continuous nitrate concentration data for the river there from January 1st of 2025 through a couple weeks ago in 2026. We are consistently above 10 milligrams per liter at that location. Okay, and we specifically got a lot of questions. Why is it so high in the winter? We don't really have much drain flow then. Why are we so high? And the question was, have we ever seen this again? Because, this is another thing. We forget about, or people forget about things. And so I got calls from the media in January of 2026, and they said, well, we've never seen nitrate concentration this high in the winter. This is the first time ever. And I'm kind of a history buff, and I'm like, well, let's go back and see what it was. Have we ever seen this before? And lo and behold, we did in 2015 into 2016, kind of those few years post drought conditions of 2012. And what it got me thinking, and maybe this is for those younger researchers in the room, I think there's an important aspect, and Kevin Keener, who isn't here, but he has, his great talk about groundwater travel time. In the tile drain landscape, I think we think of it pretty quick, but I think there's some subsurface flow pathways that take longer to get to the stream that maybe we've not acknowledged. And we might be, there might be some research direction to try to look at how long does it take some of that water to finally make it out and make it to the stream if we have that high nitrate water that's moving below the plant root zone after a drought and then slowly moving to the stream. So this is a challenge, okay? So now I've got like 4 slides that I think get at why we have the challenges that we do in the state, in Iowa and many Midwestern states. And maybe I'll ask you this, why do we have high nitrate in the streams in the Midwest? Precip, okay, precip, yeah, okay. We'll talk about, yep, precip is definitely one. Okay, all right, let me ask this. Okay, I'm gonna have, in Minnesota, let me ask you, and I don't know these, I'm gonna have to go to the slide, because I don't know these numbers off the top of my head.
I'm getting mad.
100, what's that?
I'm getting mad.
Matter.
Organic matter.
Organic, and I'm gonna, yeah, exactly, okay, it's organic matter, yes, exactly, okay. So, how many acres of corn were grown in Minnesota 100 years ago?
Not very many.
Not very many, okay? All right, I love that. Okay, let me ask, before I show you Minnesota, okay, your neighbor to the south, right? And we've stayed the same size, we haven't, have you heard that this legislator in Iowa wants to annex the first set of counties in Minnesota? Yeah. Sorry, I'm sorry, I don't. Okay, anyway, stay the same size. How many acres of corn do you think we grew? We grow about 14 million acres in Iowa now, 13 to 14 million acres. How many acres do you think we grew 100 years ago? A lot less. I like this. A lot less. We got a bunch of scientists in here. Give me a number. 2 million. Thank you, Matt. Okay. Actually, we grew about, for the last 100 years, we've grown between 10 and 14 million acres of corn every year. 100 years ago, about 11 million acres of corn. Yeah, isn't that, I had one, I don't ever talk in class, or I don't lecture in class very often, and I asked students this, and they said, oh, about 10,000 acres? And I'm like, okay, so, but what's changed over that time? Okay, we went from, corn, oats, because we needed the grain for livestock and for horses. We had a lot of pasture land, we had hay ground. We went from what was a diverse cropping system to now this is our acres of soybeans. And so we changed our land use from a diverse cropping system to an annual cropping system. Okay, now I did pull up, here's Minnesota. So 100 years ago, it was almost 5 million acres. Okay, and now it's about 8 or 9 million acres. So there's been a little more increase. The places that are fascinating is go look at the Dakotas. The Dakotas, actually South Dakota is really fascinating. It's got this dip. So in the 20s and 30s, they grew more corn than they did in the 60s and 70s, and then it's come back up. North Dakota, we've seen a big increase in corn acres. So why do I bring this up? So this is a slide kind of thinking on the organic matter side. This is a slide that my colleague at Iowa State, Dr. Mike Castellano, put together that I think illustrates why we see some of the challenges that we do and maybe gets at the root cause of some of our problems. This is the red line. He illustrates the rate of soil nitrate from soil organic matter. As our soils get warm and moist in the year, we convert a portion of that into the nitrate form. The green line is the rate of corn or of nitrate uptake by corn or soybeans. And if you look at that red line and the green line, do you see a problem? Just a little bit, Reed, what's the problem?
A little bit off there.
It's not correct in time, right? Okay, and this wouldn't be a problem except what happens during that early gray area.
Not water.
What, that's when we get a lot of our precipitation, right? That's when we get the excess precipitation, and that nitrate would be at risk of loss. Okay, so think back to what the land use was 100 years ago. Would that red line and the green line be the same? No, because what if we have something growing out there earlier, wouldn't that green line shift to the left? Okay, and there'd be less opportunity for nitrate loss. So we'll talk about some of the other factors, but I think one of our factors from a nitrate concentration standpoint is we have an annual cropping system where once there was a perennial. So what are some things we can do within the corn soybean cropping system to reduce that nitrate loss and still have corn and soybeans out there? There we go. Who said cover crops? Absolutely. Yeah, that would be one of the big ones. Okay. Because this is even irregardless of fertilizer. Now, we were talking before, one of my pet peeves is when I hear, well, a few pet peeves, but one of my pet peeves is when I hear nitrate runoff. Is Laura's like, she probably heard me say this before, okay? Nitrate runoff, that's what the media always says, and it bugs me. How do we lose most of the nitrate? We lose most of our nitrate in that water that's moving through the soil profile, okay? And so, you know, that surface runoff may be low in nitrate, but we have to focus, as we think about nitrate reduction, we need to focus on reducing the nitrate concentration that's in that water that's infiltrating, okay? And then in some areas, it's intercepted by a tile line, and in some areas, it may move through shallow lateral flow or deep percolation to other water bodies. Now, Gary's probably gotten it before too. Tile drainage causes all of our nitrate loss. Do you ever hear that in Minnesota?
A couple of times.
A couple of times, okay? And tile drainage is a delivery mechanism of nitrate that's lost from the plant root zone to downstream waters, but we lose nitrate whether we have drainage there or not. It just may move to a downstream water body differently. And hopefully we have different practices that work for non-tile or for any condition where we're reducing nitrate concentration in the plant root zone. But one of the good things about the drainage is we know where it's coming out and we can treat it. And we'll talk about that. So this is not, here's our slide for the Iowa nutrient reduction strategy, pretty similar for the Minnesota nutrient reduction strategy of looking at practices and available data that documents, at least on a plot scale, what is the nitrate reduction from implementing that specific practice. And Dr. Randall, your data was actively included in much of this, specifically on timing and inhibitor. And so, you know, there's a whole range of practices. And in fact, as I think about it, working with farmers in Iowa, you ever been to the restaurant where there's like 100 things on the menu and you almost have a tough time choosing? I think in a way, we sometimes do ourselves a disservice by having this long list. Because at least in certain areas of Iowa, we could probably take off a third of those practices because they may not be relevant. You know, we might be in an area that doesn't have tile drainage. Let's not have those tile drainage practices on there. Maybe then it's easier to come up with a solution that might work for your land. Okay. But I want to point out a couple things here. One is the red practices are kind of our infield nitrogen management. Although cover crops are included in there, they might be a little bit of a gray area. And one of our challenges is that a lot of these practices would provide us benefit, but they aren't going to get us to the 45% reduction. And we're going to need to think about other practices. Okay. I would also say these types of documents are living documents that evolve over time. So these arrows point out 3 practices that have been added to our nutrient reduction strategy and definitely the Minnesota nutrient reduction strategy since the first release on saturated buffers, multi-purpose oxbows, and 3-year crop rotation. So this is where research that's being done, places like University of Minnesota, Iowa State University through the Iowa Nutrient Research Center is really influencing what's happening on the land. And I think the best example is, our saturated buffers. That was not included initially. Since that point in time, it's been included and now it's being cost shared out on the landscape for farmers to implement. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about some of these practices as well as maybe get at some of the data that we have to back some of this up. And I better keep moving for time. We have a number of drainage water quality sites throughout Iowa that are set up similar to the sites at Waseca and Lamberton here in Minnesota, where we monitor individual tile drainage plots for how much water is coming out and sample that for nitrate concentration to calculate a load of nitrate that's leaving the field. And we don't have plots that are 50 years old, like the Waseca plots. I heard they're going to turn 50 this year, okay? But we have 36 years of data, continuous data at our site in north central Iowa, Gilmore City, a site that gets about 28 inches of annual precip a year. And one of the things that's interesting is that we have plots that essentially have had the same agronomic management all 36 years. Say between 150 to 160 pounds of nitrogen per acre to the corn, a combined corn soybean system, early season side dress that whole time. Okay, so we're able to look at what's happened over 36 years at that site, just with the nitrogen management. What do you think's happened? If I were to ask you, what's happened to corn yield over that time? It's gone up. Yep, and our yields are a little below the county average, but they follow trend line county average yields perfectly parallel. There's no statistically significant difference in the slope. Okay, so I'm going to have you think about what do you think the nitrate concentration has done during that time. So here's our drainage volume, and it varies, right? So the climate, those of you, somebody said, there's a lot of drainage in some of those years. Anybody remember 1993? You're not from Iowa. You don't remember 1993 like I do, right? We had floods. The city of Des Moines, they couldn't, no, Des Moines Water Works was underwater. We had, in a couple of those years, we had about 27 inches of drainage. Reed, were you still there? And no, you're done. Okay, all right. Okay, thankfully, yeah. So, but this is where, on average, we get about 10 inches of drainage at that site, if you look at the long-term average. But look at these 4 years right there. We had 4 really dry years in a row, okay? So here's our nitrate nitrogen loss in pounds per acre per year, okay? And it varies, right? But it follows pretty closely, the patterns follow pretty closely with the drainage volume, right? So that's the driver. But, in 2007, we lost 90 pounds of nitrogen per acre from that system. Okay, so this is our flow weighted annual nitrate concentration. And I think this graph, to me, is pretty important. It isn't the most new and exciting science, but there's a couple interesting things here. If we just studied this for the first 4 years, if I were to just cut that off, you would say, man, I can make great improvements with nitrogen management. I went from a nitrate concentration of 18 down to 7. Okay. But if you were monitoring in this period, you'd say, oh, crap, it's going way up. Okay. But if we look at it over the long term, it's about flat. There's not, even though we've increased yield, we've not seen, discernible trend in a decreased nitrate concentration. And a couple things is, we definitely see increases kind of post drought. So here is 2013 or 2012. We spiked up about 7 parts per million in 2013 following the drought. Look at similar thing happened in 2024 and 2025 post those 4 dry years in a row. I think this is one way to illustrate kind of the challenge with meeting our goals with just infield nitrogen management. Okay. We did see when we used the winter cereal rye cover crop. Okay, and this is in north central Iowa. I know it's not southern Minnesota, so but still in north central Iowa, we get a lot of complaints. We'll never be able to grow cover crop there. Let me just tell you, for any cover crop folks in here, we don't grow the best cover crop at this site. It wasn't like this reduction was because we had like waist high cover crops. It was more like mid shin at best. Okay, but we still saw in 2013, 2024, and 2025, we were able to effectively mitigate that increase in nitrate concentration post drought conditions. Even with some dry, Nancy I think it has some dry falls where we didn't get the best growth in the fall, but we did get growth in the spring. Okay, and if I look at, we have 10 years of data here now that over those 10 years, we reduced nitrate loss with the winter cereal rye cover crop by about 111 pounds of nitrogen cumulative over that period. Okay, so that helped us keep quite a bit of nitrogen out of the stream. And in this case, we didn't see a major yield hit with our corn or soybean. Okay. So now I want to get back to that red line and the green line. I don't have those curves for a prairie, the curves, but we went in 2008 into some cropped areas right around Ames, bulk crop from Iowa State land. Okay, and we put in new drains and 24 new plots, and 8 of those plots got restored prairie. And 4 of those restored prairie plots have gotten nitrogen fertilizer, 75 pounds of nitrogen fertilizer per acre per year since 2008. Okay, you helped put this site in. So
I still have blisters out.
you still have blisters from it? Okay, yeah. Well, it's tough. Okay, so here's our cumulative nitrate loss for 4 of the treatments: continuous corn with winter cereal rye cover crop. So we did see some benefit, and this is kind of like the worst case cover crop because we were killing it, about 2 weeks before corn planting. So we didn't have a lot of growth there. Look at the nitrate loss from our prairie, whether it was fertilized or not. My colleague yesterday told me I needed to extend this axis below 0 just so you saw those lines on there. So cumulative, we lost about 4 to 5 pounds of nitrogen per acre from plots that were in prairie, even when that prairie was fertilized. Okay, here was the flow weighted annual nitrate concentration over the long term. Continuous corn with cover crop, and our prairie, whether fertilized or unfertilized. So, if we want to solve some of this with, on our land, the more we can have something growing out there, a greater percentage of the year, the better. I recognize prairie is not necessarily a economically viable crop right now, but okay, now you're getting a little bit of my own, the things that I love. And I'll say it about Iowa. I'm not going to say, I won't try to project onto Minnesota. I want to see more cattle on pasture in the state of Iowa. Because if we converted in some areas, some of our row crop land that maybe isn't as high producing into prairie or into pasture, I think we could reduce some of our nitrate loss. Okay. Now, all right. Satish mentioned organic matter, and that is super important. And so this was part of our Nutrinet project. Did you have a no nitrogen plot too? Ronnie? On,
Yes.
you did, okay, all right. So this site is in northwest Iowa, so it would be about 40 miles south of the Minnesota border, about straight south of Worthington. Okay. And we had a fall nitrogen, a spring nitrogen, split N and no N. And I showed this for a couple reasons. One is the top graph is the corn year, the bottom is the soybean year. And we, at this site, we don't see any statistically significant difference between the corn phase or the soybean phase in nitrate concentration. Okay, so to make it easier to look at, I'm going to combine. At this site, that fall N is when soils are 50 degrees and cooling, anhydrous with an inhibitor. And we see similar nitrate concentration as a spring anhydrous pre-plant. This was at 140 pounds of N per acre. If we did a split application, so in this case, we put 40 pounds down pre-plant, and then I think 100 pounds down in season in early July, agrotane treated urea. We saw about a 15 to 20% nitrate reduction. But over those 6 years, even when we applied no nitrogen in those 8 plots, 4 in corn, 4 in soybean in a given year, they received no nitrogen that whole time. 2013 was the last time those plots received any nitrogen, and it was a partial nitrogen application for oats. And I just looked at the data this week. We've kept those as no nitrogen, and they're still about 7 milligrams per liter, even after a decade. So this is that organic matter that with those high organic matter soils, we're going to be limited on the gain that we can make with just infield nitrogen management. When I talk to farmers, I say, will you at least grant me that the most aggressive form of nitrogen management is no nitrogen application? Yeah. And they'll grant me that, okay? And even with that, we can only get about a 40% reduction in nitrate concentration that's leaving our system. Okay? So we have to do something else, things like this. I told you I had to get a picture of cattle in there, so there's my cattle grazing. Okay, now, for those that aren't as familiar, I'm going to go through these quick, and you can have hour-long presentations on each. And we have 2 world leaders in here on the denitrification bioreactors. And these are those types of practices that we can use to treat that drainage water. So the good side of drainage, of nitrate coming out with drainage, is we know where it's coming out and we can treat it. We can promote denitrification. That doesn't take the place of doing the best job we can in field, but I believe we're going to need to do this as well. So this one, we're going to route a portion of our drainage water through a carbon media trench. I say it like that, Laura, because you're shaking your head. You don't, because most of them are wood chips, but in Iowa, we have a couple corn cob bioreactors now. Okay, where they're because utilizing that carbon for denitrification, so that water that comes out of that bioreactor at the end is going to be lower in nitrate because of denitrification. And we might have 20 by 100 foot long bioreactor in there, or maybe shorter than that now, right? Yeah, okay. I mentioned the saturated buffers, and this is one that Eisenhart and the late Dan James came up with, I think over a napkin at a professional society meeting. But we have a lot of buffers, Minnesota has a lot of buffers, right? But if we're looking at nitrate, a lot of that nitrate is going right through a drainage line under the buffer. So what if we put a control structure in, run that water along the upstream edge of the buffer, and promote shallow groundwater flow below the buffer and promote denitrification and plant uptake? And they found that this one as well can remove nitrate load by 40 to 50%, even accounting for the bypass flow that might happen there. Okay, I would say both of these work on a more of a field scale, like an individual farmer scale. Okay, now this is probably my favorite. Okay, I'm a little biased, but Maybe I'll ask you all why this one might be better than the others, but not better, but provide some other things. So in this case, we are installing a wetland, creating this. You can see the berm there and the sheet pile weir, and we're going to capture drainage from the upper lying area and the surface flow. And so in Iowa, from the research that's been done by Dr. Bill Crumpton, if that wetland pool is about 1% of the area up above, from the monitoring and modeling, they'd expect it to remove about 50% of the nitrate coming into it on a long-term basis. In a wet year, it's going to be less percent, but a higher mass. Drier year, maybe a lower mass, but a higher percent. But long-term, about 50% reduction. And then there might be, you can see some of the flowering plants. There's a buffer around there kind of to square it off and protect upstream drainage rights. So we might be taking 3 to 4% of the land to remove 50% of the nitrate. Okay, if you have that landscape, that sounds like a pretty good trade. And would this area provide other benefits? What other benefits might you see there? Wildlife, waterfowl, what was it? Habitat, yeah, absolutely. Okay, now these are shallow, so not fish habitat. And the farmers often ask that. Can we put fish in there? No, they're probably gonna die in a cold year, okay? But we got waterfowl habitat. If we think about, there's a lot of questions about monarch habitat and pollinators. That buffer area around there may provide that. They're depending on how they're designed, there could be some flow attenuation benefits. If you allow, depending on where that weir is set and how much of this area you might be willing to inundate with water. Okay? They've also been looking at next to stream channels. Again, just routing drainage water in there and promoting denitrification in a multi-purpose oxbow. Okay, but specifically routing drainage water into there. And I might have to change my tune because maybe this ultimately will be my favorite. But as we think about many of these practices, they cost somebody money and they may not improve the economic return for the farmer. But here's one that might do that, which is, as I talk to farmers and ask farmers, would you like to have 2 or 3 inches of water back in late July and early August? And they say, absolutely, right? So why don't we store that water that we lose in the spring of the year and use it for supplemental irrigation for crop production? So we're keeping that nutrient that would have otherwise gone downstream. We're storing it and reusing it. My best analogy for this is, do any of you have a rain barrel? Anybody have a rain barrel? No, this is like a rain barrel on steroids, okay? I mean, it's a really big rain barrel. Now, Fabian said, I'm an engineer, right? Can we engineer this system? Okay. But is it economical? I think that's the big question right now. Is this economical? We can design this, we can build, storage type systems, but if we have to pump the water into the reservoir, back out of the reservoir, I think there are questions about the economics of it. So we need research to look at what are the economic benefits of this. We have 3 sites. We've done some pretty extensive work on it. We see anywhere from a long-term, a 15 bushel yield benefit up to a 50 bushel yield benefit. But it's dependent upon the soils at that site and how responsive they are to that irrigation water. Okay, so that's something that I think has, at least is worth looking at. Also, talked to some students and folks today. If we had that water and we had a little water in the fall of the year, we might be able to put that on and get better cover crop germination early in the fall. Also, we're looking at maybe intensifying crop production to try to have something growing a greater percentage of the year. So we're looking at relay intercropping, where after the corn crop, we'll plant rye, and then into that standing rye in April, we'll plant beans. And then when that rye matures, we'll harvest off the rye seed off the top and let the soybeans come up through it. But a challenge is that we may be water limited in late July and early August with that soybean. And so our soybean yields are greatly reduced because of water needs. This could provide that water. So we have a lot of practices we can use. We report them and others do on various dashboards. So if anybody's interested in the Iowa nutrient reduction strategy, you can go to this website, do that, click it to give us more clicks. Okay, so this is an example scenario for Iowa, but I think it illustrates the scale of change that we need and something that we need to talk about. So in Iowa, and this is in 2013 dollars, I recognize that. And I know we've changed from an MRTN decision support tool to the NFAC tool, which could be something to talk about, but this scenario calls for us to do the best job we can with nitrogen management and 60% of all acres in Iowa having a cover crop and 27% of all agricultural land treated with the wetlands and 60% of all drained land with the bioreactor. That means we need about 12 million acres with cover crops. We need about 6 to 7 million acres treated by wetlands, not 6 to 7 million acres of wetlands, but 6 to 7 million acres treated by wetlands, and about 6 million acres treated by bioreactors and saturated buffers. Okay? That's a lot. Okay? And so a question might be, how are we doing? Okay? Well, a few things. We've seen an increase in nutrient inputs in the state of Iowa since the 1980s. We've seen about a 30% increase in nutrient inputs in the state of Iowa. With that increasing happening in the late 2000s into 2022. So this is commercial fertilizer and manure, the combined sources. That's probably not a positive as we think about nitrate, okay? But we are up to, depending on the source, about 3 to 4 million acres of cover crops in the state of Iowa. Okay, so that's pretty good. But one of our challenges, look at those last 3 years. So we had a pretty good slope on that line. But if you look at those last 3 years, I think this is our challenge. Have we gotten a lot of the early adopters willing to try this? How do we get that line continuing to go up? Because remember, at least under one scenario, we need about 12 million acres. So we're about, 30% there. Okay. Now, I want to note the scale is different on the y-axis of the next one. So wetlands, we've been creeping up, but we're still only treating, at least by 2023, about 150,000 acres with wetlands. Now, I will say in 2025, there were 25 of those wetlands built, treating about 25,000 acres. So that was a big increase. But if we look at it compared to 7 million, we got a long way to go. And here's our edge of field practices other than wetlands. Okay, in part because we're getting more of those out there. There are these batches that are building like 40 or 50 at a time, but we're treating like 50 acres at a time. So we could do 50 bioreactors if they each treated, we'll just say 50 bioreactors, each of them treated 100 acres. That's 5,000 acres. I can do 5 wetlands and get 5,000 acres. Okay, so, in Iowa, I think about how do we change that trajectory on all of these? Because I guess I'd like to see a difference in my, in my career, that we see some of these really start to go up. Okay, so now this is where I'm like kind of positive, optimistic and pessimistic. Okay, I'm optimistic because I believe the nutrient reduction strategies that have been released have focused efforts around nutrient reduction that weren't there in 2010. So they focused people working on this. That is a really good thing. That is really good. We have the tools. I don't think we need more research. I mean, I'm at a university. We want more research, right? But I don't think that that should be a reason we don't implement these practices. We have enough information to implement practices on the landscape. And practice implementation is increasing. You know, at least in Iowa, I think I've seen it from Minnesota, practice implementation is increasing. That is a positive, but we need to recognize the scale of change needed is huge. And I think that at least, you know, at times we set unrealistic expectations. I think in Iowa, there's been expectations, well, you've been at this 10 years, why do we still have nitrate in our stream? Well, because we have 24 million acres of row crop and we have to do something on essentially 24 million acres of row crop. So, you know, what does the future hold? Well, I think the future holds discussions on how we accelerate that rate of adoption. I think we have to have, you know, discussions about, you know, how are we going to pay for this? I didn't talk about it, but in 2013 dollars, I guess I'll just go back here quick. In 2013 dollars, our total equalized annual cost to implement those practices is about $750 million a year. Okay, that's a lot. Now, but that's a lot until my ag economist friend, some of you know my Chad Hart. Chad Hart says, "Whoa, but that's only $36 a row crop acre." You know, that then it doesn't seem quite as big when you look at it that way. Okay, but this is, you know, how are we going to pay for this? I think is a question that we really need to wrestle with if we want to scale this up. I think at times there are mixed messages that individuals get. There's a lot of talk about the progress that's happening. And I think then the mixed message is, hey, we're doing great. Maybe I don't need to be worried about it. Now, I think we have to, I'm not a communications person at all. I'm an engineer to my core, but I think we need to figure out how do we recognize the good things happening while challenging that we need to do more. And because I think there are times when folks hear we're making progress and their mind kind of shuts down after that and they don't realize how much more we have to do. We should be able to say, we've increased cover crop acres. You know, that is a good thing. We can celebrate that, but we can say we're only 30% of the way there and we need everybody to get involved, not just some. I'm also a believer. Are there opportunities? And that's why, you know, green, you know, thinking about green cover and things like that. I had a farmer come up to me once and he said, "Matt, we've grown corn and soybeans in Iowa forever, and we're always going to grow corn and soybeans." And I said, "You do know that we didn't grow hardly any soybeans before World War II." And he said, "Really?" I'm like, "No." Okay, so we can't, you know, we can't get into the mindset that we can grow other things. We have the most fertile soils in the world, right? Some of the most fertile soils in the world. Yes, we have challenging weather conditions at times, but you know, maybe there are opportunities to grow a variety of crops. My colleague Mark Licht at Iowa State says, you know, maybe it isn't a third crop. Maybe it's a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh crop. That there are localized markets for those different crops. It's not like we're going to have 10 million acres of rye next year, but maybe around, you know, localized areas, we grow some different things. I think there are some opportunities there, as I mentioned about pasture land. Okay, and about my last point, and then you probably should shut up. But I bring this one up a lot, and I'm not sure, nobody listens to me, but I think this is really important. We have a challenge with many of our rural communities within a lot of our Midwestern states. I think that if we really work to scale this up, whether it be all kinds of wetlands, all kinds of bioreactors, thinking about cover crops or other things. There are rural development and workforce development opportunities. If we were, I've seen it, we're building 25 wetlands a year. Okay, that's up from about 5. Well, somebody has to do that work, right? Somebody has to construct it, somebody has to design it. Maybe in the future, somebody has to make sure we're managing that buffer area, right? I think there are workforce and rural development opportunities in that space. Maybe I'm way too optimistic about that, but I really think there are opportunities there that maybe we should be thinking about a little bit more into the future. Okay, my last one. I believe it's possible to reach our goals, but we need it all. We need in-field nitrogen management. We need cropping practices and land use. We need edge of field practices. We need to increase the rate of implementation. And, you talk about continuous living cover in many areas here. My colleague coined, I guess maybe he got it somewhere else, but Dan Anderson says we need to be ABG, always be growing. Okay? And we need to be, always growing, maybe in everything that we do, but also can we have something growing on the land a greater percentage of the year? And even some of these edge of field practices, many of them have something growing a greater percentage of the year. Maybe that's not what's doing the nutrient reduction, but it's something more diverse on the landscape to look at. So with that, I can't thank you enough, Fabian, for the invitation. I hope there was something that was of use to you. I said this morning, I don't get nervous that much talking in front of an extension audience, but I was dang nervous here. I don't know if I have anything to add from that you don't already know, but it was a distinct pleasure and a real honor. And again, thank you to all of the wonderful colleagues, mentors, and friends that I've had from Minnesota over the years.
Now it's time for any questions that you may like to ask.
You didn't mention tile drainage
Yeah.
to any degree. What's the tile drainage future in Iowa? And how do they buy into what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, guys. Yeah, the question was, kind of how does tile drainage fit into this? What's the kind of future of tile drainage in Iowa? And I think, consistent with what, Gary does, we try to talk about, drainage is important for crop production, but we should think about how we do that design. And, maybe we can put in shallower drainage or controlled drainage to kind of manage some of that outflow. I'm under no illusions that all kinds of people are doing that. But what I would say is, I think that these drainage contractors can be in a way, a delivery mechanism for a lot of these edge of field practices. They're the ones that are going to put in saturated buffers and bioreactors. And I think more of them are seeing this as a business opportunity than maybe did 5 years ago. And so I think they need to be engaged with this because we're seeing more tile put in, as we talked about one time this morning. In a lot of places of Iowa, I'm not sure we're seeing a lot of acres that have never been tiled before, but we are seeing the increase in the density of the tile for that individual field. And so, how can we design that or manage that? We try to talk about that, try to educate folks on that, but I think it's a big issue, going forward. And I think some of these practices like the drainage water recycling, saturated buffers and bioreactors may be a way that, if you're going to put in a drainage system, let's make sure that we're treating that water before it gets to the stream.
I had a question about some of these edge of field practices and how how to avoid some of the other negative consequences. So from a full nitrogen budget strategy, how do you design something that can, promote denitrification, but take it all the way to nitrogen so that we don't have an inverted nitrous oxide emission?
Yeah.
So, like we don't construct wetlands or restore them properly, we can have a lot of methane emission or other consequences. Like,
Yeah.
I know there are like trade-offs to all of these things, and I just wonder how you thought about those.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was how we think about the trade-offs with some of these edge of field practices, relative to nitrous oxide or methane. And so I think about it, I don't do the research on it. So I will completely recognize that. But, there's been work specifically on the saturated buffers that I think, Morgan Davis did that. Yep, with Tom Eisenhart. I think what they found was that, that even though we're removing all that nitrogen there, they're not seeing an increase in nitrous oxide emission as compared to if that was cropland. So there's not a, kind of a disproportionate increase. Similar, Dr. Bill Crumpton's done some work on N2O emissions on the wetlands, and actually they still have it ongoing. So there'll be more published about that. But that what they see is, yes, they see some nitrous oxide emissions from that wetland, but they're about similar to if that was under annual row crop production. And it's removing a lot more of that nitrogen. But I think that that's absolutely something we need to, and we funded some of that work from the Iowa Nutrient Research Center, kind of recognizing we can't just assume it's all good, and we need to look at that in more detail. So that's a great question. I'm glad you brought it up.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I think that's another area that, it'd be important to do, a lot of active research. And that could be a reason, that you'd say, okay, we want to increase the pace of adoption, but we also want to learn about some of these things as we go too. And how, if we manage them in a certain way, does it help us reduce some of the unintended consequences?
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks for that great presentation, Matt. The second bullet on your future slide is about, how do we pay for all of this? It's a tall order, all these practices. Can we ever get there if all the cost benefit is kind of locked down at the farm scale? Is that a big thing, that scale of the finance? Even though I know the federal government is stepping in to an extent, but it's problematic.
Yeah, I mean, Gary kind of bringing up, if we think about it at the farm scale, is it, can we get there? And I think it's a huge challenge because I don't think we're going to have enough cost share to pay for all of this, at least in a reasonable timeline. And that's why, if there were, if over time we built up some markets for, different crops that help us with this, that could be a benefit. One thing that, this could get in the weeds, but there, has been, some discussion in Iowa, at times about, okay, some of these drainage district mains are being improved. If you tied that improvement to putting in a wetland for nitrate removal, there could be some market drivers associated with that. If you see improved crop yields out into the field, I think there are some potential, possibly, I'm not a policy person, but some, thinking about the policy of what we have out there. So I think this is a huge question that I think if we realistically want to meet this over the next 30 to 50 years, we need to have more discussion about how is this done from a financial standpoint. Is a question like that?
Matt, next time you talk, what are some things that state agencies are doing in this space that we might find encouraging here in Minnesota?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that I guess I kind of mentioned it, the question was, what do you find that state agencies are doing that are encouraging? And this is, I guess I'll put that one thing is that I think there's a lot of engagement between the state agencies and the land grant universities in a lot of locations that maybe didn't happen. And maybe it, I think it probably did in Minnesota, and it certainly did in Iowa. We had a lot of engagement like at the time of the nutrient reduction strategies, there was a lot of engagement. But I think Mike can attest to this, that we had a regional committee of land grant university folks, research and extension, that met with the task force. And so for like me, I knew the people from Iowa on a first name basis and things, but some of those other states, they had no, like, the person at the state agency involved with the task force didn't even know the person at the land grant university. So I think that's been one positive, is that, you know, there's more connections there. But I do want to bring up one thing in particular, which is the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship in Iowa recognized that, for these edge of field practices, you know, if you were relying on a farmer saying, I want one, going into the soil water conservation district and saying, hey, do I have a site that works for a bioreactor? To them having to, NRCS having to design that bioreactor, to the landowner having to get a contractor to do it, to paying that contractor and then get reimbursed. My gosh, that is a long process. So the Polk County, John Swanson and others, Keegan Colt with the Ag Drainage Management Coalition said, what if we just went out and we surveyed the tile lines in an area and we asked that landowner if they're willing to have a bioreactor or saturated buffer on their land, and we'll do it all for them. We'll be the fiscal agent, so it doesn't impact that landowner's taxes. You know, they are getting that, and then, you know, you just say, I'm willing to sign this, that you can look at my land, you can look at a bioreactor and potentially put one in, and then it just gets done. That, I think that's how, I think that's thinking about new delivery models for some of this. How do we make it easier for the farming? I think that one other one is that, and I think they need to talk about this a little bit more, but there's been a program in Iowa as well with IDOLs to look at it as kind of a grazing lands program. And so they're helping provide some, you know, cost share incentive for a landowner that maybe has row crop that's wanting to think about transitioning away from row crop into pasture. And they're, you know, kind of assisting them doing that. And so, you know, it's been something I think has been a little bit different, but they've been getting really, I think, really good interest in that. And I think it's been in some specific areas, and there's been interest from other areas to expand it. So those are a couple examples. I do think, you know, if we think about these edge of field practices, you know, there may not be a direct benefit to the farmer. So how do you make it easy for, you know, a farmer to put that in, or, you know, a tenant or a landowner, you know, all those dynamics. If somebody else is just handling it, I think there can be some real efficiency to scale on that.
You have a question?
No. Satish.
That wonderful presentation. There are two elements of nitrogen.
Yeah.
Moving to the rivers.
Yeah.
One is the fertilizer and the other is the water.
Yes. Yes.
All our money that the state universities have gone in the nutrient. We always talk about nutrient.
Yeah.
But for water management, we are getting about 4 to 6 inches more rain from 1940 to now.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about the crop, you know, we have more corn now than before.
Yeah.
There's something is related to the precept too.
Yeah.
And it's a water, that's a major carrier. Concentrations are not here.
Yeah.
You want to comment on that?
Yeah.
You know, why aren't we doing enough research on water?
why aren't we doing enough research on water for those online? I do think that, I think that's important. Heck, I'm gonna make a comment. We had Bob Horton retire at Iowa State University in soil physics. I'm not sure we're gonna add a soil physicist. I don't know if that's gonna happen. It's sad when I think about the great, soil physics, people that came out of Iowa State in soil physics, and, that there might not be a replacement. So I would agree with that. We need to think about water management. We need to think about water. Are there opportunities for water storage on the landscape? Because we are getting more precipitation. And if we're getting more of that precipitation, especially in the spring of the year, you know, there's just nowhere for it to go. And so I think we do need to think about water management a little bit more. I think that, you know, I'm not, and maybe that's a way that if we could have something growing a greater percentage of the year, can we increase transpiration a little bit in the spring of the year with some of these small grass? Especially if there were double cropping units, if that was possible.
I think you mentioned before, you're looking at the nitrogen side and so on. With the wetlands, you're gonna be, water table is gonna go. Water table is gonna extend past the wetlands.
Yeah, yep.
And if you got farmland, are you gonna have a perpetual timeline running over there?
No, so one of the things is that you'll notice that's part of that buffer area is to try to have enough topographic relief so that we aren't negatively impacting, kind of at least the crop production in that adjacent area. Okay, and so that's why, so there probably is, maybe a little bit at the lower tile line level, there could be, but these are specifically designed, okay, there's some new ones, I'll tell you about some new ones as well, but the one that I showed you a picture of, that wetland pool, the normal pool elevation is 1 foot below the tile line coming east. To try to 1 foot below the invert of the tile. Okay?
You still have capillary fringe.
Yeah.
And you're gonna have wet soils and that's gonna.
Yeah, but in some ways, we've outlet that tile where in the past it may have been undersized at that point. Or undersized further down below. So yeah, do we have maybe the water table a little higher around the wetland? That definitely may be the case, but I think it's relatively, a little bit smaller. Now, the other thing that is being looked at on these wetlands is, we've had there was a huge problem. I think they finally got regulatory relief, but those wetlands, like I showed you, the Army Corps of Engineer was requiring stream mitigation. So if there was a drainage ditch, man-made conveyance, and you put that wetland on top of it, you needed to mitigate for that stream reach that you put the wetland on top of. That was greatly increasing the cost of these. They couldn't, and the Army Corps of Engineer would not look at kind of what environmental benefit might be provided by the wetland. They've gotten over that, but as a result, they started to look at pump west. Okay, now I'm not sure I'm a huge fan of a lot of maintenance in the future, but they started to look at, can we pump water from the drainage main into a wetland and then gravity it out from there? And, with some of the solar pumps and so forth, it may still be, relatively economical, in part because you don't need the big buffer area around those kinds of wetlands. But there's continuous maintenance involved with it. Anytime you can use gravity, that's a lot better than thinking about pumping into the future. Yeah. Les, I was expecting Les that you to ask a question.
Change plans.
Okay. Yeah, no, yeah, good to see you.
Yeah, thanks. Issues, I'm a Iowa landowner.
Yeah.
Okay, and you spoke earlier a little bit about tenants.
Yes.
Over half of the land in both Iowa and Minnesota cropland is rented.
Yeah.
Have you thought about what Iowa thinking in terms of approaching those two different types of land ownership versus renters?
That Les asked how we approach landowners, tenants, all those things. Recognize that is a huge challenge, and I don't think that I think there's more that we can do about that. I will say one thing though. I think sometimes all of us can get caught in this. We think of groups as kind of a homogeneous unit, right? And, so sometimes I hear, oh, it's that absentee or non-operator landowner that's the problem. And they won't do anything different. Well, they're like every other segment of our society. There's a whole spectrum, right? And so there are some non-operator landowners that want to do these things, that are the ones pushing for it. Not all, but I think we want to be careful that we don't, assume that all of them are one way or the other. And we have to figure out how to reach some of those individuals. And I think that's still a challenge because, that they may be spread all over the country. I think that there's more we can probably do with some of the farm management entities that are out there that may be managing some of that land for those farmers and, are working with those families. And I think, some of them have done that and talk about conservation a little bit more, but I think there's probably more that we can do in that space as well. So I view, I think we want to talk to more people that own the land, no matter, or manage the land, whether they own or manage the land, we want to talk to them. And we probably have to look at a variety of mechanisms I think we have to get creative with our communications strategy. So for all those people working in this space, work on the communication side, because I think a lot of this is communicating, how do we get it in front of them and what's gonna appeal to them? For some people, it might be having a wetland on their land, because they can have wildflowers and things like that. For others, it's probably something different. I don't have a good answer to that. I'm gonna hide behind, I'm an ag engineer. But I want to recognize it is super important. And all I would say is sometimes I get, people on campus, at least in Iowa State, will be like, oh, it's all those absentee landowners. Well, we have to realize they're a whole spectrum as well, so.
One last question, anybody?
If there's no one else.
Okay.
Matt, as we've shared the podium and talked to lots of practitioners of drainage and so forth, and with so much intensification of drainage, so much drainage occurring on the landscape, and as we know that in many cases, when conservation drainage is not considered, when those systems are going in, it's an opportunity lost, maybe for generations or maybe forever.
Yeah.
Are you in favor of something to compel the practitioners, the designers of those systems, the installers of those systems to at least consider some measure of conservation, when those new systems are going in or replacement systems are going in? Because we're not getting, you mentioned that we need to get at the, contractors are conduit for.
I think kind of the question, should we be compelling them that they have to think about this as part of the design? And like almost saying why we're, justify why it's not possible to put that in. I'm gonna try it. I think it's tough because, I don't want to take that.
It's a philosophical.
Yeah, I don't want to take a like advocacy position, but I think that we need to be looking at how we do more. And if that's a way to help us get more, then I think that there could be benefit there. So I think we have to kind of look at all available solutions and maybe bring up some, maybe is there a need for more required training for a lot of these things? We have pesticide applicator. Somebody, wise person said, like, you have to have how many hours to cut somebody's hair? How many hours do you have to apply anhydrous ammonia in the state of Iowa? Now, I found out Indiana actually has a training program to apply anhydrous ammonia. I just learned that yesterday, or they did at least when Steve Freeman was in school. So I don't know if it's required, but maybe there's, more need for continuing education on in some of these areas. We certainly have it, pesticide applicator. Maybe there's some opportunities in other areas as well.
All right, well, let's give our speaker. It is time now to mingle outside in the hallway for a while. So if you have other questions or want to just mingle, please be our guest. Thank you so much for coming.
Just come and do that, 'cause they